Hello folks, the time has come. You've heard me talk about it long enough. We got to get this upper and lower intake swapped over on Project Revert. What we have here is a trick flow upper and lower, all the gaskets and that good stuff, hardware. This is actually gaskets upper to lower. I got a couple there. So I got this used from a new friend of mine, Damien, down in Everett, Washington, who has a beautiful two-tone emerald over titanium GT. I'll try to put some photos up there for you so you guys can check him out. He was a real treat to deal with. I talk about this a lot on our podcast and every once in a while on here. It's a disaster to try to get anything shipped from the United States up to Canada. Now, what's going to go on here is, I think, well, a few things, and this is standard issue if you've caught any of my other Project Revert videos. I'm going to pull the upper off, throttle body, cold air intake, all that stuff. And then I think I'm going to tape off the lower. I'm going to leave it on there for now. Clean up everything in here. I'm going to tuck the wiring harness and everything under the firewall pinch there. And so it's going to be a little bit of a combination of things here. So this isn't going to be necessarily just a straight up how to swap over to a trick flow upper and lower intake. There's going to be some other stuff going on here too. So wire tuck, upper and lower intake swap. Lord only knows, I'm sure I'll find some other rabbit holes to run down. Hey folks, okay, just wanted to interrupt this teardown to show you a little something here. Now, I get a handful of people every now and again, which I assume are new to the Foxbody world, and they're just kind of looking to do some relatively cheap and maybe not all that involved upgrades to their engine. And the question I usually get asked is, hey, do you think I should get a bigger throttle body? And my question back to them is, do you have the stock intake on there? And the answer usually is yes. And I say, don't even bother. You're literally wasting your money. Save up and buy an intake. Here's why. See inside that hole there? Now this is obviously a spacer, but the spacer is bigger, so that it would be a 75 mil spacer and then an OEM sized intake. Look at the difference, right? So you're literally not doing anything. You're just making yourself maybe feel like you got a little more oomph in your seat because you've put a bigger throttle body on it. There's your next choke off point. Okay, don't bother buying a bigger throttle body or a bigger mass air or any of that stuff until you upgrade your upper and lower intake, and this is why. Okay, there might be a lot of interruptions as we tear this thing down because the deeper you go, the more of the forensic story you start to understand. One of the questions that I had when this car first came into my shop was, where did all of this oil in here come from, right? Like, it's splashed all over the place. It's all over the shock tower. And I was like, is it coming up off the flex plate on the transmission? Because there's no like scatter cover or dust cover on the front of the transmission and everything's leaking back there. So I was like, I don't know, maybe that's how it's getting up here, but it looks like it's coming from up here somewhere, right? Well, anyway, we get over here to these Ford Racing extra tall valve covers. Check this plug out. It's not even a plug. Like, and I mean, this is obviously a vent for venting off crankcase gases, and you know it should be vented somewhere. Old school way of doing it would be down to atmosphere, but they typically get routed back up and into the intake, and that goes through the motor and reburns. Well, that was the plug that was sitting there. I don't even know how it was still sitting in there. Maybe it's fallen off and blown into here and it's been replaced back in there a couple times. I never saw this, right? Because all of the throttle linkage and everything was in there. Oh yeah, we got a ground strap here too. That's main harness ground strap, and it was grounded here to the throttle body. That's a ideal place. No, I'm being sarcastic. That is not an ideal place. You need a proper ground for that. But anyway, yeah, just found this beauty. So the plot thickens each and every bolt that is loosened on this poor car. Okay, upper intake's off. We got some fairly significant traces of oil here too, right? Now, there was a small part of me that was holding on to hope that whoever put this together was doing some sort of a sneak attack and had a stock ported upper and lower intake on it. However, my hunch was correct. This is a bone stock, just painted upper and lower intake. So I don't know who or what or how they were thinking about this when they built it, but like the fact that this punched out bottom end and trick flow heads with a stock upper and lower intake is just beyond me. So I showed you guys the main choke off point and why, you know, you don't want to just put a bigger throttle body on it. You're literally doing yourself no good whatsoever. Well, the same goes for the whole upper and lower intake. Like this is it's the fuel injected HO302's #1 kind of limitation. So if you were going to spend any money on a bone stock 5.0, go out and find yourself a GT40 upper and lower intake or something and match it with a larger throttle body. You know, then you're starting to do yourself some good. But I'm going to just kind of do a case in point here. We'll steal this gasket off that god-awful spacer. God almighty, I hate those things. So, stock upper to lower intake gasket. Look at this. Right? Like, this is the whole choke off point that I'm trying to prove to you, right? I mean, going to these bigger aftermarket intakes is one of your #1 modifications when you want to start getting into like changing relatively more difficult hard parts, okay? It's absolutely drastic. Now, I should mention, because some of you watching this with a tight eye might notice some polishing and little bit of grinding that's gone on in here. So this intake was touched up by Mr. T. Moss. So some of you old vintage folks out there might remember him from the forum days. He actually ported my lower intake, my Cobra lower intake on my green coupe. Now, he doesn't like aggressively get into these. It's more of a cleaning, I would say. And Thomas, if you're watching, I hope that I'm not, you know, I'm not trying to take anything away from your work, but I'm just trying to say, like, it's not an aggressive port job. It's just a tidying, right? And you can kind of see that. Here, let me get a light, and then you guys can see in there a little bit better. You can see the difference, right, in the shade of the metal. So like the whole thing is by no means ported. It's just cleaned up and smoothed out, right? He does a lot more work in the bottom end there. Geez, I hope you guys can see that. So yeah, I mean, it's well worth it. Very happy that he did mine. You know, you've got other fellas out there now like Big Dog Porting that take these and just absolutely bore them out, right? So yeah, but Thomas was a good option back in the day. I don't know that he's doing it anymore. Anyway, I just wanted to really point that out to you guys, right? Like the difference from a stock intake to an aftermarket, or even a GT40 for that matter. And GT40 would be like, if this is stage 1, GT40 would be stage 2. Now we're getting into stage 3, right? Like this is bigger stuff. And then obviously it gets even bigger from there. But yeah, we actually, it is May when I'm making this video, but you'd swear it was September, October. We got all kinds of leaves and stuff in here. So I gotta get the shop vac out. We'll get this cleaned up. Okay, looks like a rat's nest, but believe it or not, there's progress being made. All right, where to even start here? So what I'm doing here is essentially removing a lot of the sheathing from the looming that this car would have come with from Ford. And you can see the looming underneath is beautiful, right? So if you take yourself a sharp knife, be extra careful, right? Make sure you're not cutting on the, you know, whatever, through the inside of the convoluted tubing. Find a spot like down here or whatever, and just nicely kind of get yourself through it. All of this stuff peels off really, really easily, right? And it's like, it's this. It's like a, I don't know, some sort of a plastic wrap, right? There is some tape in there too, wherever you've got a joint. Down in here, you don't have any like right off the, where the harness goes through to the computer. So you got to be extra careful there. But like all this stuff on convoluted tubing comes off really, really easily. And you can pretty much have yourself a brand new looking harness, right? Now, what's going to go on here is all of this is going inside the shock tower. This is an old trick. I'm sure some of you watching this already know about it, but you can tuck all this stuff in there. There's a hole in the backside of the shock tower. The trickiest part is getting these relays in there. You have to unpin them and repin them once you're through the shock tower. So I'm gonna jack the front end of the car up and get myself some clearance in the wheel well here. You do it all inside here. And you can, yeah, just tuck them essentially in here, just on the backside. Now, what else? Injectors have been unplugged. I'm going to go through that harness and tidy it up. And this main harness that goes side to side, it's going to live underneath this pinch weld here. We're going to go, we're not going like full tuck, we're going like mini tuck. And yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of this stuff's quite boring. It's just tedious, right? You're horsing around and like there's little stuff that's gone on here. I didn't bother bringing, you got to like bring this harness all the way through the rad support, but I left this one and, you know, move the grounds down. Like this ground's usually up here, and you can just do all these little things that really stand out and make a big difference. What I find actually funny about doing this is once it's done, say if you brought the wife down to have a look at it, she'd be like, well, so what'd you do? Right? Like it's almost, what you've done is what Ford should have done at the factory. But I get it, time, whatever. This is an easier way to just drape all the wires in, close the hood, put her for sale. Okay, here we go, ladies and gents. We're gonna start the tuck. Now, you've got some options here, okay? So, I mean, essentially, you can work within any of these holes in the shock tower. So, the one that I think I'm going to work with here on this particular tuck is going to be, it's all right, keep some light going for you, this guy here, because I want to be cognizant of the fact that, you know, I want to stay out of the way of this whole coilover situation. So, what we're going to do, and I mean, I'll show you this as we go, is essentially everything is just going to come in and live in behind this coilover inside the pocket of the shock tower. So all this stuff's going to come over and plug back in. Okay. And yeah, like I said, we do have to do some unpinning in order to get these through because, well, you can probably tell those are not going to want to fit through those holes, right? So we're going to unpin these. wires from the backside of these relays and repin them on this side. Now, photos are key, okay? I've talked to so many people over the years where they've gone and done some sort of a wire tuck and like they literally get themselves into so much trouble that they don't know even how to start their car anymore, right? Like they've essentially rewired it back asswards. So you want to take lots of photos, make sure that you're paying very close attention to what you're doing, especially when you're unpinning, okay? And these harnesses are getting old too, folks, so don't get too rowdy with them, right? Like, take it easy and be kind. But yeah, so I'm going to start the process of pulling all this stuff through. And, oh, I should mention too, you don't need to pull the wheel well liner, okay? I just did for informational purposes. Plus, whatever bozo put this car back together after paint never plugged in the vacuum canister. So actually they had it on backwards too. Yeah, never fails with this car. Can I help you? Hey, I got to get some work done here, buddy. We're all pulled through, ladies and gents. So, and I've reconnected the mass air and these relays and stuff. So now the fun begins. We got lots of room to work with now. You can see how much room there is on these harnesses, right? When you pull them through and run them through the shock tower. Now it's just going to be a matter of mounting things out of the way. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to start pulling some of this harness apart, and you know, the relays are going to live up in the shock tower, kind of out of harm's way and or water. I most definitely will be loading these up with dielectric grease, so there's a good solid waterproof connection in the relays. You know, the mass air obviously needs to go through the fender and over to the mass air. We do need to plug, like there's essentially, we got loose ends everywhere, right? We got to start connecting everything back together. So you got to kind of pull this harness apart and put everything in its place. Okay, you tell them what we did. Tell them. Nothing, eh? Man, a few words. All right, guys, we're talked. And I wanted to give you a quick look at what's going on in here kind of before I get the wheel well liner in. And my apologies, you know, I'm a one-man band, right? So about a time lapse is the best that you're going to get out of me, and then some sort of a recap here, especially something like this where I got to be using all my brain power and all my hands. So yeah, relays are tucked in the shock tower. The O2 sensor harness is also wrapped and tucked in the shock tower. I've left the mass air, I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet, okay? I might go under, I might come through. I kind of like the idea of under, but we're going to play with that once, while the intake's on and the cold air intake and all that stuff. I had to mess around and kind of reroute the previous restorers wiring. So the O2 harness was just, I don't know. This thing, you guys are probably getting sick and tired of me hearing it, or saying it. But yeah, lots to do here on this thing to make it, you know, usable. And I guess the other side of this too, folks, obviously we're dealing with a tubular K-member, right? So that changes things slightly. If you got your stock K-member in there, you might have some other things to work around and whatever. But yeah, that O2 harness, I tried a few different things, and this was about the best that I could figure, is follow the K-member up and in behind those brake lines. And yeah, I mean, obviously you're not going to see any of this, but it's more the functionality of it all. So you're not having a tire accidentally rub into this or whatever. So I'm going to get the wheel well liner in here and make sure that I've taken all my measurements into account, and everything's going to slide in here nicely. Wheel well's in. Here's the final. Just give you an overall view of where everything lives and tucks away. Yeah, I think it worked out quite nicely from the top. So we no longer have that god-awful harness coming over here anymore, right? that all lives here now. So might have to do some finagling here. So we still got to run air conditioning, right? And yeah, so again, there's just lots and lots of things to do here, but I think I should have enough room to work around in here and, you know, get our AC safety switch plugged in and everything. So I'm going to get the tire back on this thing, get it sitting on the hoist again, finish up this injection harness. Then it's intake time, folks. I promise. All right, ladies and gents, the time has come. The lower intake manifold is coming off. So I'm just going to try to give you a quick high level as to how this is all going to unfold because, again, I say it all the time, but I'm a one-man band and it's a little difficult to set up a camera, hold a camera, all that good stuff, and or talk you through this. And to be honest with you, I'd probably bore you to death if I went about it that route. So here's the overview. We got to disconnect fuel lines, okay? There shouldn't be any pressure in this because the car hasn't ran in quite some time, but if you do need to bleed it off, there's a Schrader valve right here. So we're going to disconnect the fuel lines here. You need fuel line disconnect tools. They're like a little clamp dealy. Buy those at your local parts store. We're going to pull the fuel lines off, probably leave the injectors in there because, well, we're not reusing them. I do have to obviously clean up this fuel rail, right? It looks like total garbage and we're not putting it on back that way. I actually have a new fuel pressure regulator. I'll show you all that good stuff when we go to install the new intake manifold. First steps first, you got to obviously let some coolant out of this thing. Now, procedure manual does tell you to like drain all the coolant. I don't necessarily think you need to. Just drain it below the top rad hose and save yourself some whatever time and money with wasting unneeded coolant. We got to pull the distributor. Now, a little trick to that is, again, procedure manual, right? You would essentially get your motor to the compression stroke on top dead center before you go to pull the distributor. I'm not going to fart around with any of that. So I'm just going to mark where my distributor currently is, pull it, and drop it back in the same fashion. So how you go about doing that, guys, obviously just pull the caps off the clips off your cap and mark your distributor, right? You can see I've got a little red line there. Take yourself a photo so you know like roughly where it was timed, and how you do that is just kind of eyeball where your TFI module is, and we're going to put it, essentially take it out in this fashion and put it back in the exact same fashion. Okay, so that's a quick little workaround there. Outside of that, I mean, just be uber clean, like over the top clean with everything, surgical if you can, and take your time, get yourself to a point where you can start removing your bolts. Another thing too, it is a good practice to remove the bolts from your intake in the same fashion that you torque them on. I know this is getting real technical. This would probably be more of a thing that you would want to do if you were going to put this intake back on, because they can warp technically if you just start buzzing the bolts out of them. So it is a good practice if you want to be like by the book, pull it off in the same sequence that you torque it down with. Right, intake is off, and even though I was like, you know, over the top, extra careful, you can see you still get coolant kind of doing what coolant does, which is sort of going everywhere. It's always a good idea to give yourself an oil change after doing something like this, right? Just to be extra sure that you got, you know, clean fluids in your vehicle. But we got to clean this all up, right? Doctor up the valley, dry all that stuff out. And okay, while I'm thinking of it, so I've got this Tupperware. It's been following me around for years. It's great for stuff like this because it's long. But check this out.
even though I go to great lengths to try to make sure I don't spill anything, right? So got a little bit out the backside, trying to break the seal loose along the China wall at the back. And we got a little bit going down the bell housing. So we got some cleanup ahead of us. Anyway, things learned while kind of removing that intake. One massive one was there was maybe 3 of those bolts that actually had any kind of bite on them. I don't even know that anyone torqued that intake down. And I don't know how many miles. I mean, it's probably easier to measure it in hours that were on this motor when it got put together. Not very many, for sure. And you can see, right? Like, look at the junk that's leaking out of here, and just not a very good job. It's actually very, very sad that there's people out there doing work like this. Anyway, is what it is. We're trying to make it better. Cork gaskets too, right? Like, I know some of the old school stuff likes cork gaskets, but I don't know. Not these 302, especially these new age trick flow heads, right? Like, get yourself a proper set of gaskets. Actually, not only valve cover gaskets, but like, you know, get yourself a proper set of intake gaskets too. I don't even know what these are. They're just junk. Definitely nothing fancy. Just a bottom of the barrel, like Mr. Gasket or something, you know? Garbage. Actually, here's another good comparison, right? In one of the other videos when I took the intake off, actually no, I guess it's the start of this video. I took the intake off and I was showing you guys those intake runners. Well, from the, sorry, I'm all over the place. The intake runners from upper to lower, right? These versus the trick flow upper to lower. Well, here's another good comparison, right? So here's stock intake runner. Here's trick flow. Just massive. And you know, that's what these cylinder heads deserve. Like, look at the holes in those bad boys, right? Anyway, I'm just droning on now. So I'm going to get after cleaning all this random coolant up, folks. Go through a couple rolls of paper towel, and we'll get the block and the heads ready for the new gaskets, and we'll drop that trick flow on here, start putting her back together. Okay, ladies and gents, quick little recap as to what's occurred here. So we're cleaned up underneath the hood. Few things to note, okay? Just take your time and make sure that you clean this up with surgical precision. And the reason being is your ultimate seal that your intake gets up against those cylinder heads and the front and rear China wall of the block is only as good as your cleanup job, okay? So take your time, use a shop vac, don't lose anything down in on the valves and in the cylinders, okay? Or in your coolant passages, front and rear. Just take your time, clean it up, and be extra, extra, extra clean. Now, you can probably notice here I've got 4 studs, front and rear, 1, 2, 3, 4. So all that is threaded rod, or all thread for you Americans. I think that's what you guys call it. 3/8 by 18. Like, it's the same thread pitch as the bolts that you run down into your cylinder head to bolt your intake down. And what this does is gives you a guide to set your intake down on. Once you're set in there, thread those out, run your bolts in. This is especially needed for those that do the silicone sealant, RTV, right stuff, whatever your choice is, along the China wall. Some people, I've even got a set of them here. Some people run these, like the rubber front and rear gaskets. I know Chris, the infamous project, swears by them. I've always been like a silicone sealant guy. Whatever you do, don't use the cork ones, okay? Just stay a million miles away from those. That's my personal opinion, okay? If you're going to use these, you know, obviously throw your silicone in each corner where it kind of, the cylinder heads meet the block and stuff. But I don't know. I've been thinking about running these because I've never ran them before. Chris swears by them. He's never had a leak. I don't know if I can do it. Anyway, I think that's where that is. Oh, the heater tube. I did take this off. You do not need to, okay? I took it off because, well, I wanted to clean it up. So the owner of this car is obviously expecting like a restoration, and things were kind of dusty under here, whatever. So I just undid the hose clamps, pulled the heater tubes off, and cleaned them up quickly. I think that's all for under the hood, folks. Again, I can't say it enough. Extra, extra, extra clean. Okay. So now we need to, well, I need to do some cleaning for sure. I got to clean up these fuel rails, and we're going to start transferring things over to that intake. I might put the fuel rails on once the trick flow intake's in the car. I don't know. We'll see. But I am going to get like the thermostat housing and everything out of there. I'm going to put that on this intake before it goes in the car. I guess it kind of boils down to personal preference. Whatever you like to do. Some people throw the thermostat on once the intake's in the car. It's up to you. But I'll most likely put it on the bench. We are fully set up and ready to drop this guy in. Now, I did have some battery problems, so you guys might have missed out on a couple of the sensors here. So air intake temp sensor went in. Now, this one wouldn't be as relevant for everyone because this has to do with the Dakota Digital Dash, the temp sensor, coolant temp sensor that your car may run if you run a stock dash, looks like that. What else? Oh, okay. I have to mention this, folks, because, yeah, I almost had a huge screw up. The wife and kids stopped by, thought it'd be nice to bring me an ice cream. And, I got BSing with them, and I'm dropping this thermostat housing and thermostat and the gasket and everything onto the intake. I almost put that thermostat in backwards. Like I was bolting it up and I was threading the screws in, or the bolts in. And I'm like, is that in there the right way? And I had it in backwards. Thank God somebody tapped me on the shoulder. So anyway, for those of you wondering, the spring and everything goes in towards the body of the intake, okay? It is, believe it or not, easy to screw that up. So, yeah. And you know what? Just to like double, triple check, like don't ever underestimate the power of the old Haynes manual, right? Geez, that one has seen some days. Look at the research and stuff. Like I've had this book for years. If you look through those receipts, I bet they'd be from the 90s. Anyway, yeah, so we are ready to go in. Now, I do have 2 sets of gaskets here, okay? So I've got, both are Felpro, but I got the MS 93334s, and then I have the, what are these, the 12, I got them laying on the motor right now, the 1262S3s, okay? And you can actually see I've got those rubber China wall ends in there. Here's the deal. The rubber China wall ends come in one kit. The MS 93334, and then these 1262S3s, which are a just stunning gasket as far as gaskets are concerned. They come in their own kit. So I have 2 gasket sets. For whatever reason, this 1262S3 comes with cork ends. I don't know why, right? So if you want to go this rubber China wall route, you need the 2 kits. Now, I've never done this before. Actually, I shouldn't say that. We did it on the shitbox Fox when we built that car to take to Detroit. Because Chris swears by these rubber end links. I've never ran them. I've always run some sort of a silicone. Okay? But here's kind of why I'm thinking I might run them. So with them on there, you can see, so nothing's, I don't have any like high tack on there or anything, but you can see that like these line up pretty much dead on when they like sit against these rubber ends, right? And now, for example, as soon as I take that out of there, it falls, right? And now, granted, I'm going to have high tack on here and stuff. Like these gaskets essentially will be glued in place, but I kind of liked how like there was just no fuss with anything. Like it lines up pretty much bang on perfectly. You got to be like side to side. Some gasket shit in there. You got to have that all figured out, but goodness. Anyway, that'll be easy enough because like I say, I'm going to run some high tack here. So for any of you wondering what this stuff is, here you go. High tack gasket sealant. So I'm going to run that on my coolant ports. Okay. Another method is some sort of like black RTV or whatever. But this high tack, I'll maybe show you what it's like. It's kind of interesting stuff. Hold on here. Got to use the old knee method. Like it's almost like gasket, like black gasket maker. Very tacky, right? I'm going to seal my coolant ports up with that. And yeah, this is always like a bit of a high stress scenario because obviously you don't want to cross this bridge twice. But I don't know. We're going to put the high tack in there. I'll see if I'm kind of feeling the need for any RTV. I don't know. It's one of those things, you can overthink this to death, but at some point you just got to drop her in there. Intake's on, and I got to be honest with you folks, I chickened out. I used some RTV on the coolant passages. And listen, I keep calling this stuff RTV. It's not. It's the right stuff, okay? And anybody that works on cars like more often than not knows what this stuff is. It's the only stuff to use. It's better than RTV, but anyway, I call it RTV. So I did use some RTV in the coolant passages. One will never know if that keeps this thing from leaking or not. As long as it doesn't leak, that's all that matters, right? But I did use the China wall rubber gaskets. So infamous project. If these things leak, I'm blaming you. And I'm sending this thing down to Texas so you can change the intake gaskets on it. But anyway, I did do that. And one thing I should mention is if you're going to use these rubbers, the China wall rubbers, make sure you put a dab of RTV or black silicone in each one of the four corners where those rubbers meet your intake gaskets. You got to do that, okay? Just be safe. Another thing, so I followed TrickFlow's torque specs. You should follow your intake manifold manufacturer's torque specs, okay? These are a little different than Ford's. The process for bolting it down, like there's a whole like back and forth process, is the same, but their torque specs on this intake is a little higher than Ford's. But in a pinch, if you followed Ford's, I think you'd be fine. And one more thing, so you do this in like 3 steps, right? In this case, you go 12 foot-pounds, 16, and then 22. I just, because whatever, I overthink everything, I still go around another 2 times after I'm done those 3 incremental steps. And it never fails. When you do it, you still get more movement out of those bolts. So on the like 5th time, if you're going real crazy, 6th, you'll notice that all of them settle in and everyone is as tight as it should be as per the spec. So something to note. I guess from here on in, it's just kind of rinse and repeat. Everything that I took off's got to go back on. You guys seen it all come off, so I don't want to bore you with it going back on. I got to put the injectors in, put the fuel rails on it, and I still have to clean those up. So once I'm done chatting with you guys, that's what I'm going to get after. And I should mention too, if you've got a fuel rail that's looking like garbage like this, a real quick and easy way to clean it up, takes a little elbow grease, but get yourself some 4/0 steel wool. So when you're buying this stuff, it'll just have 4 zeros on the package, okay? Really fine. It'll clean all that cancer up that's sitting on your chrome fuel rails like nothing, okay? So sit there, have a beer, and polish away, and those will clean right up. So yeah, then that can go back on. I do have, I think I mentioned, a new fuel pressure regulator and a fuel pressure gauge. I'll just mention it now, but I'll show you guys that stuff going on in another video. You can put that fuel pressure gauge like right here on the Schrader valve. That's what I did on my coupe. And then, you know, you can sit here and adjust your fuel pressure and watch it on the gauge right here. And the gauge under the hood looks kind of cool too. So anyway, lots of loose ends, but I think this kind of wraps the whole intake install. So I guess I'm leaving out the whole top intake, right? Like the plenum, but that's not rocket science, folks. Okay. There's really nothing you can screw up there. Put the gasket on, 6 bolts, torque to spec, you're done. So I'll leave that out because I do have to change the valve covers out and whatever, right? So yeah, I think we'll leave this one here. Next one, again, we'll pick up probably similar process, lots of loose ends. And I'll try to see if there's, I got air conditioning to do. I got interior to do on this thing. So I guess we've got some high level generic topics that the videos will be based around, but most likely it'll be like these ones, loose ends with a bigger topic involved. So thanks so much for watching, folks. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please share it along. That's why I do these videos, try to give back to the community in any way that I can. So thanks a lot. I'll catch you on the next one. Take care. Bye for now.